Thank you very much, and thank you everybody for coming along to my session, which is the second last session for the conference. And so I'm just going to talk today about our experiences with a peer support learning program over in Perth. And just firstly, I'd like to respectfully acknowledge the past and present traditional custodians of this land on which I'm presenting today. So during COVID-19, right at the beginning, probably March 2020, probably everyone remembers that date. So Perth is probably a little different to the east coast of Australia. We did have a slightly different experience of COVID. In fact, we only were just let out of WA in March, so I'm actually very excited to even travel outside of WA. There was lots of things thrown around, like it's Fortress WA. WA is like another country now, so we definitely had a slightly different experience, but we did go through a number of lockdowns, especially during the initial periods of COVID, and also we had a lot of periods where we had a lot of restrictions, so we'd only have certain numbers of students allowed in the library or staff and things like that. So basically what happened is, like every other university, we had to transition to online. So all of our sessions, so our lectures and tutors, tutorials, everything went online. And so what we felt was that there needed to be a service to help students to transition to that online. So suddenly students were required to do all of their classes online. They had to present online, they had to do all their assessments online. And so they were suddenly using a large range of learning technologies like Panopto, PebblePad, our learning management system, and some of them had no experience with these technologies before. So what we were asked to do was set up a peer support service, and what we called that service was VEEPS. So that's a virtual peer support for learning technologies. The students came up with that name themselves, and we created a logo for the service, and then we had to think about how we're going to implement that service. So we looked at a number of range of ways and technologies to do that. And I just was at Michelle's talk where she talked about Teams. So inevitably, we'd actually started using Teams at ECU, and we were just getting used to using it when COVID happened. So we were in quite a good position to start using that as a technology. But we did have a look at some of other technologies that we use at the university. For example, we have a customer relationship management system called Salesforce, and that has a chat feature. So we had a look at whether we could viably do that. And as you can probably remember at the beginning of the pandemic, this all had to happen very quickly. So we were basically told, okay, we need a service to support students with learning technologies, and you have like a week to set that up. So normally pre-COVID, you probably have like 6 months to set something like that up. So basically we decided to use Teams. So Teams it doesn't technically have a chat service. So like a chat, like where like you can chat individually with people, you can set up meetings, you can do presentations. But so we had to look at it from a technology point of view and set up an actual chat service within Teams. So it's not traditionally used as that kind of service, but what we did was we created a shared email for all the peer assistants. And so in Teams, the name of that team is peer assistants or VEEPS. And students see that and they know that they can immediately chat with a student, with a peer. So the other advantage of using Teams in this was a lot of the issues and problems that the students have with technologies, they need to show what the problem is. And so Teams has that sharing feature. So it was really useful for the students using chat to be able to go, oh, could you just show me what your issue is? We'll turn it in when you're submitting an assignment, for example, so they could have a look at that. So we ran the VEEPS service in 2020, and initially we also set up a phone service for it because, as some of our academics pointed out, if students don't know how to use learning technologies, perhaps they don't know how to chat, and they might find it, and they haven't used Teams before, so some of our students had never used Teams as well for classes and other things, so we did add a phone service, and admittedly, actually the phone service was more difficult to set up than the team chat. It was quite difficult to set up. So I just wanted to give a bit of a background in terms of the literature around this space. So for those working in universities, you're probably aware of PASS, so peer assistant study sessions. So kind of peer programs in universities have been around since the 1970s, and now we're really expanding into a lot more peer programs within universities, and we're especially expanding into a lot of generic sessions across different areas, teaching and learning, especially like academic skills, orientation, library. And for us, so the literature talks quite a bit about in libraries, it's more often to be students working as student assistants, maybe helping out with information literacy. So I think what we're doing with learning technologies and doing that as a digital literacy initiative is quite unique in that perspective of utilising peers to help in that space. So in terms of the benefits of peer programs, there's a little bit of mixed reviews when it comes to the literature. So there is some evidence that it can have some benefits on grades and retention, but it especially seems to have a lot of impact on generic skills for the students. And what we've actually found, which I'll show in a few slides, is it's had a lot of impact on the students itself that we hire in terms of their employability and the kind of skills that we're giving them by running this program. So basically the way the peer assistant program works, this is one of our peers, Lewis, so they basically have a daily inquiries spreadsheet and an Excel spreadsheet. And so I should have mentioned that when we came back more face-to-face, we actually expanded the service to be on campus as well. So it's run on campus across our 3 campuses in WA. And then we took away the phone service as well, because as I'll show in a minute, that wasn't as popular as chat. And so then they do a consultation log for longer queries. So often they'll have to refer queries, so it's like a tier system. So they'll do a consultation log for that. And they anything that's a longer session, and as you would know with statistics, if it's a short directional question query, they don't log that in Qualtrics. And so what also happened in 2021 was we did a refurbishment of our library, and we moved our Centre for Learning, Teaching, Learning Advisor staff into the library, and some of our careers staff also moved into the library. And so we needed a referral/concierge style service for those services as well. And so we thought the best approach was we actually combined our learning technology service with that concierge service. So this peers actually do both of those services now. So I've just put up the actual tech queries, but now that they're back on campus and they do directional style concierge queries as well, they handle about 8,000 queries a year. Last year they did. Obviously we don't have full statistics for this year. But just to give you an idea of the actual technology questions they're answering, so this year, it's a bit higher because of the face-to-face elements. So last year, when they were just doing the chat and phone kind of services, it was around 824 queries that the peers were doing. And last year, in 2021, about 1,500 queries. So the majority of their queries are around Microsoft Office. They get a lot of queries for Microsoft Office, like Excel and Word. And they also get a lot of queries about our learning management system, which is currently Blackboard but moving to Canvas. So probably the interesting stat there is in 2020, they had a really high percentage of video conferencing tool queries, but as you can see in 2021, they barely got any queries on that. And a lot of that was because obviously in 2020, everyone had to learn how to use Zoom, how to use Teams, and so they were getting a lot of queries about that. And then in 2021, we moved more across to not using those tools as often. So I think, interestingly, what we found was, and you can pretty much see there on the right, is students really wanted a face-to-face interaction when they were asking questions. And so as soon as they had the opportunity to come back on campus and ask questions, that's where the majority of our queries now come from. So even though we still get quite a few chat queries online, and as I mentioned, we discontinued the phone service because it just wasn't popular enough to be utilised. So we really found that and that's similar to what they talk about in the literature as well. That, you know, and again, I think that's been quite a theme of the conference as well, wanting those connections. So in terms of resolution, so what we found across the last 2 years is there's been quite a big increase in the amount of queries our peers have been able to resolve. So you can kind of see in 2020, they kind of seem to be able to resolve around 60 to 70% of queries. And if they couldn't resolve them, they referred them. So they could refer them to the library or to IT or teaching and learning. There's different ways they could refer them. And some of them, for example, PebblePad, it's quite a high not resolved, but that was because sometimes the queries are not related to something they can fix. So if it's a real technological issue that perhaps only PebblePad could fix itself because something is wrong, or IT could fix. But what we attributed the higher success rate in 2021 is to training. And so some of our peers have worked for us for the last 2 years. Of course, they've kind of increased their knowledge over the last 2 years. But also what happened in 2020 is we had to set up the service so quickly that we had to do training very quickly as well. And so as we kind of progressed the service, we got feedback from different people from other different areas in terms of, okay, like I think the peers might need some more training in this area, in this technology, or they might need some training in customer service, all of this. So we did increase the training quite a lot in 2021. And so I think those combination of training plus experience has meant they've been able to resolve quite a lot of the queries. So the other thing we looked at is who's actually utilising the service across our schools. So we have 8 schools at ECU. And so what we found was that the School of Nursing and Midwifery was some of our highest users in 2021. And they were asking a lot of questions related to Blackboard, the learning management system, and PebblePad as well, which is a portfolio tool technology. But in 2020, we found that the School of Business and Law students were asking quite a few questions around Panopto. And that was because in that school, they were asked to do a lot of their assessments, like video assessments. So suddenly students had to learn how to record videos. So we got quite a few queries around that space. In terms of queries, the School of Nursing and Midwifery, the students from that school utilise all of our services the most. So it's kind of consistent. They'll come to the library, they'll have appointments with librarians, they'll have appointments with learning advisors, so it's kind of consistent in that sense. SBL, on the other hand, so School of Business and Law, they are less likely to utilise our services, so that was a really interesting stat to see that business and law students were utilising the learning technology service quite a lot. So the other thing we had a look at is what types of students were utilising the service. And in terms of the student body at ECU, the female mature age, we have a lot of students in that category, so that kind of number is quite consistent with our student body as well. But it was good to see who was utilising our service and that everyone was getting a lot of benefit from the service. But interestingly, we also had a lot of students that were first in family and students with disabilities that were utilising our service. We also had a lot of students, international students, that utilised the peer service. And actually quite a few of our peers are international students as well. And uni prep, so students that are bridging between, like a TAFE course, for example, going into university. So the university is currently transitioning from Blackboard as our learning management system to Canvas as a new management system. So what we decided to do was we decided to expand our peer program more to have a Canvas peer champion program. And we wanted to kind of shift the focus a little bit to have students as partners as well and kind of co-design some of the experiences in the service. So not only do they work on the desk and answer the chat, but they actually go along with librarians and they help facilitate sessions. So we have a digital readiness session in orientation that goes through all of the learning technologies they use at this university, and they help facilitate that. They do drop-in sessions as well for Canvas, and they also create materials for us. So Danielle, who manages the program, has them create a lot of the materials that we use to support students. So we really wanted to move it to not just being a service that is created by us, but is co-created by the students as well. So as everything else, we always get feedback from our students. And I think, overall, the feedback from students about the service has been overwhelmingly positive. So we had pretty much 100% of students say they were helped by the service, they were comfortable using the service. And I think there's a lot of evidence to support that students are often comfortable with their peers asking and answering questions. Probably the negative feedback sometimes would come from staff. So if they'd overheard a peer answering a question and then they'd come to us and go, oh, I just heard them saying this and I don't think that's correct. But in general, and that was good feedback though, because if there was something that they were saying incorrectly, we could have a look at that and make sure that we send messages to the peers to correct that. Because we use Teams for everything. And so it's like Teams. And we have a Teams chat. And so it's really quick because anytime they're like, okay, this has happened, if there's an update with technology, we're just constantly sending the peers messages saying, this has happened, you need to know about this. We've heard this, you've talked about this, but actually this is the correct way, things like that. So I'm just looking at the time almost. Yeah. So I think that in terms of training, so we did quite a bit of training induction so that the student peers are really aware of who to refer to. So the library, the Centre for Learning and Teaching and Careers. We do a lot of training on the actual learning technologies themselves. And we found when we came back on campus, we obviously had to do quite a bit of training in customer de-escalation as well, and dealing more with customers. We also use the students to do observation. And so we've done a massive user experience study, for example, after our refurbishment to see how successful a refurbishment was. And we had the students go around and observe how students were using the space and had them interview other students as well. So we've been able to really utilise the peers a lot and be quite successful at designing our programs and services and spaces with their help. So in terms of the peers themselves, what we've found is it's quite consistent with the literature in terms of the benefits for the peers working for us. So we found they talk a lot about their learning communication skills, they're learning about teamwork, they are now learning about all the technologies themselves and are aware of how to utilize all these technologies. So I think what we've really found is it is really helping with the students' employability to work in this service, and so that there's been a lot of benefits for them, and most of our peers stay with us and across while they're studying, because I think they really find the service and very beneficial to them. So this is just a few quotes from the peers themselves about how much they've enjoyed working for the service and how it's helped them both professionally and personally as well. I won't read everything out. So in conclusion, we really felt like the service did meet the goal that we had of supporting students to transition to online during COVID, and then we were able to then evolve that service. So when we came back on campus, we were able to transition that service to also be a face-to-face service and also expand to provide support for other areas as well. As I mentioned before, we really did find that if they do have the option of face-to-face, that's where we are getting most of our queries from. And basically also we needed a really significant investment in training programs and processes. And that's something we learned over the time, that, it does take quite a bit of time to set these kind of programs up, and they kind of evolve over time, and it's a bit of an iterative process in terms of training and setting up everything. We have around 30 peer assistants across our 3 campuses, so that's quite a few students that we're employing. And so just as well, I think we've really found that it does support what other studies are saying about what peer programs do and how beneficial they are to students at the university. So thank you. I had no idea what the time was.
That's great. Okay, thank you. We're just going to take some questions from the audience, so feel free to send a question through on the online app. We've got a couple already. So first question, how does your peer technology support service interact with learning advisors and librarian services?
So it interacts in a number of ways. So it interacts as a referral service, so they're able to refer to learning advisors and librarians, and they also promote to students, okay, if they come in with a certain query, they say to them, okay, well, you could make an appointment with a librarian or a learning advisor. The learning advisors and career staff also communicate with them, so we have a communication channel, and they'll say things like, okay, today we've got this many appointments available, or yeah, actually we're all booked out this week, so you need to refer them to our online services or a workshop or things like that. So there's two-way communication within the team, so everyone has access to the Teams, Microsoft Teams, and so we do a lot of communication that way. And so there's also some library coordinators that manage the peers. So there's someone that manages the program overall, and then coordinators that look after the day-to-day. So if they ever have any questions or are not sure who to refer to, they can always ask.
Okay. Yeah, I think probably quite a few people are interested in some of the statistics you shared, and I think they show how different services across different libraries can get different results. Particularly, I think the cohorts of students that you have and how they prefer face-to-face. Other universities might have different findings. There's a lot of talk about people loving online chat, for instance, but I found that interesting to see how your demographic was represented. There's a few questions here about the service too. One of the questions, do the peers get paid? And you mentioned there's about 30 of them. Like, what's the kind of shift patterns that they work? Or?
Yeah. Yes, they get paid. So the peer assistants are, if you're from a university, about Hugh level 2, and we also hire them. When we had the specialised Canvas program, we hired them at a higher level because we wanted them to do more than be at the desk, for example, and chat. And sorry, what was the second part again?
Oh, just how many hours?
Oh, yes, okay. Yeah, we experimented with that. We originally started with 2-hour shifts, but that was, we got a bit of feedback that quite isn't long enough, but we were trying to work around their classes, so it's quite difficult to give them long shifts, but what we settled on was 4-hour shifts, and that seems to work. That seems to be the best approach that we've had. And we also have a system where if they can't come in, they can ask each other to cover as well, so it's very easy for them to replace each other if they're not ill, if they're sick or something's happened.
And I've got a question here. Do you try and recruit students from across different faculties? Do you make attempts to kind of make a representative sample of the students?
Yeah, we do attempt to do that. So we promote, when we're looking for peers, we promote across the different schools. We promote in different areas, different equity groups as well. So we do make an attempt, but obviously because it's a learning technology service, one of the prerequisite things is they do need to have some knowledge of learning technologies, because we're not trying to train them from zero. We actually want them to say, okay, yes, I am quite experienced in using Panopto. So sometimes it can be a bit limited in terms of, so we do have quite a few IT students, for example. But we do, yes, we want a broad range. We have different ages, different nationalities. We've definitely got a good spread across different areas. Yeah.
Okay, and perhaps finally, could you maybe outline how your online chat service ran? Did you do sort of out of hours, or did it run sort of during library times? Give a bit more detail.
Yeah, so we were limited to library hours, but we did set it up so that they could ask a question that was answered as soon as someone came in on shift. the next day, and we did trial weekends at the beginning as well, and we did trial going in, I think, to about 6 for a while, but we've kind of settled. So we did look at the statistics of when people are utilising the service, and most of them are utilising it like that 11 to 3, 11 to 4 kind of time frame. So it wasn't really cost effective to have really broad range levels, and we do have other library staff available obviously in the evening, so they can also take the queries. And actually, as you'll probably find in other unis, some of those students work across multiple services. So some of our peers are library assistants, or they work in student life, for example. So yeah, often they can help students if they are working out of hours.